Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Economics Student Union, I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's panel discussion on vision and heterodox economics. My name is Lisa Selca, and I'm a graduate student here at the Economics Department. Before we officially get started, I'd like to thank Mary Barrowman and Lauren Schmitz, as well as Barbara Hurst and Bridget Fisher for their help organizing this event. We would also like to offer special thanks to the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis for providing a videographer so we are able to document this occasion. This panel is motivated by student interest in opening a constructive departmental dialogue about ideological differences and common interests related to the vision and future of heterodox thought in economics. To quote Robert Heilbronner and Will Milberg, "It is vision, including its valued Latin aspect, that provides much of the creative impetus for understanding social life. Consequently, vision should be the subject of open debate. It is not the presence of, but the persistent denial of vision that robs economics of social validity and that leaves contemporary economics so limited as a tool for understanding social life. Our hope is that the issues discussed at this panel will shape the context of a student conference being held next fall and inspire future debate among faculty and students going forward." We're delighted to have 6 members, well, 5 right now, hopefully Professor Reddy will make it, here at the New School for Social Research join us today to discuss their perspectives on vision and heterodox economics. First, we have Professor Ed Nell. Professor Nell is the Malcolm B. Smith Professor of Economics and has been a faculty member here since 1969. Nell's contributions are in the field of macroeconomic theory, monetary analysis and finance, economic methodology, and philosophy, transformational growth and development. Next, we have Professor Anwar Shaikh, who has been a professor of economics at the New School since 1972. His work in political economy is focused on the economic theory and empirical patterns of developed capitalism. He has written on international trade, finance theory, political economy, U.S. macroeconomic policy, the welfare state, growth theory, inflation theory, crisis theory, inequality on the world scale, and past and current economic crises. Next, we have Professor Duncan Foley, who has been the Leo Model Professor in the Economics Department since 1999. He has published in the fields of public finance, macroeconomics, money, Marxist economic theory, economic dynamics, neo-Ricardian economics, growth theory, and complex systems theory in economics. His recent work includes studies in the relation of statistical mechanics and thermodynamics to economics, global warming policy, complexity theory, and classical political economy. Next on the panel, we have Professor Teresa Ghilarducci, who joined the economics faculty in 2008 as a Bernard L. and Irene Schwartz Chair in Economics Policy Analysis and Director of SEPA after 25 years as a professor of economics at the University of Notre Dame. Her work focuses on the need to restore the promise of retirement for every American worker. Hopefully joining us today will be Professor Sanjay Reddy, who joined the economics faculty as an associate professor in 2009. His areas of work include development economics, international economics and philosophy. He has conducted extensive research for development agencies and international institutions, including the G24, ILO, Oxfam, UNICEF, and the World Bank. Last but not least, we have Professor Christian Proaño, who joined the economics faculty as an assistant professor in 2010. Much of his work has been focused on applied macroeconomics, monetary policy, and international finance, but his research interests also include currency and financial crisis, income distribution, nonlinear macroeconometrics, and behavioral macroeconomics. So as you can tell from the faculty bios, our small department has a diversity of interests. So with that in mind, we'd like to pose these 2 questions to the faculty. First, what defines us as heterodox economists today, and how would you define your work as a heterodox? Has the crisis created more space for heterodox economics and academia, and can we find a common vision for expanding the presence of heterodox economics? Each member of the panel will have 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll open up the floor for questions and discussion from the audience, and Ed Nell will start with his remarks. Thank you.
Turned it off. Okay, on. Good. Heterodox is a word that doesn't define anything very positive. And it is also a little bit ambiguous. It means non-orthodox, but it also might mean anti-orthodox. And I think that our approach is both. That is to say, we are not part of the orthodoxy, and we are also critical of it. But we're critical of it in a relatively positive sense. People have worked very hard for very long periods of time, studying economics and the economy very intently. I said that deliberately. Studying economics does not mean you are studying the economy. And indeed, if a branch of thinking deviates somewhat, focus on that and development of it may carry you further and further away from reality. I don't think it's a big stretch of the imagination to say that that's what happened with general equilibrium theory. But we try to be non-orthodox in the sense that we try to develop our ideas from an examination of the economy, and we try to be anti-orthodox in that we criticize the orthodox formulations, but criticize in a constructive sense what's good as well as what is bad in what we are examining. And we try to develop different positions. Orthodoxy, it seems to me, and we will probably get as many, if we are 6 panel members, we should get 7 or 8 definitions. It is scarcity that gives rise to value, and markets reflecting scarcity, when they are properly competitive, bring about an optimal allocation of scarce resources among the various competing ends in the economy. And this proceeds through a process of rational choice by individuals. These individuals enter into the market, which is, in a sense, an institution that amasses the pressures generated by the rational choices of individuals and brings them to bear upon each other so that a position is obtained in which nobody could be any better off without making somebody else worse off. And this can be applied to consumption, it can be applied to labor markets, it can be applied to financial markets, it can be applied to all kinds of markets for goods and services. This was the point of Samuelson's famous Foundations of Economic Analysis. There is, in a sense, one real foundation, and that is the theory of rational choice, the maximizing behavior of individuals subject to various kinds of constraints, aggregated then into these market relationships. And Samuelson showed that you could apply this across the board. Now, my own view on this was advanced in a book with Martin Hollis, and we showed that the orthodox position, we showed it as well as we could, rested on a radical philosophical confusion between description and prescription. It tried to make an equilibrium, even a long-run equilibrium, out of what could be at best be described as a set of one-shot prescriptions holding for specific conditions. This you cannot, you have the rational agent, and the rational agent makes the rational choices, and then what happens? Something different. Who made the mistake? If the rational agent was rational, then the calculation was correct, and the agent or the market makes mistakes. You cannot apply the Popperian or positivist criteria, did you predict correctly? Because if it's a rational agent and the rational agent calculates rationally, it cannot be mistaken. It is a prescription, not a description. And our argument was that this ran through the entire corpus of neoclassical theory. And specifically in the case of the Keynesian problem, an implication of the rational choice approach is what is often called the theorem of the alternative when you set it up in linear form. If you have many workers actively seeking jobs, factories idle, goods that cannot be sold, and real wages are positive, even if money, wages, and prices are both falling, that doesn't affect real wages. If real wages are positive, then labor isn't scarce. You cannot have a scarcity theory of the labor market when you have voluntary unemployment and positive real wages. This led, jumping hugely rapidly over the history of economic thought, this led to the doctrine of imperfectionism. Yes, the scarcity model is really true, really true, but there are imperfections in the market. The sublunary sphere, as Aristotle said, is full of imperfections. The world isn't what it ought to be, but our theory is. And so our theory holds, but the world has failed. And so we have imperfections that keep prices, money, wages, real wages, and everything sticky, and we continue to make use of the theory of rational choice, maximizing behavior, and equilibrium in market conditions. We refer to lack of mobility, lack of information, asymmetric information, barriers to entry, asymmetric risk, risk aversion, and all these things which prevent markets from happening and working well. However, again, a point of economic history. There really is a period in which prices rose under demand pressure and fell when demand fell. Money, wages rose and fell. We don't see that. We see rates of change of prices and money, wages, but we don't see levels rising and falling. And for 7 or 8 countries, we can show that in the period 1870 to 1914, we really had something like this, in quotes, marginal productivity condition. Employment and output moved inversely to real wages. But in all that period of time, talk about information. The Sears catalog was delivered by the Pony Express. I mean, this is not, there weren't even telephones. Information, which is supposed to cause a lot of the imperfections, was very, very slow moving indeed. And all the other imperfections were much worse. So we are trying to make a theory work by ignoring the fact that once upon a time, some aspects of that theory could be seen in reality. Now, none can be seen in reality. And so we talk about imperfections, which were actually worse in the period in which the theory did, in some ways, approximately describe some aspects of reality. This, I think, is the background to a rejection, a principled, careful, selective rejection of a massive and extremely highly developed and highly sophisticated, I don't want to say body of thought, sets of bodies of thoughts that are linked by a common belief that scarcity is what gives rise to valuation. Whereas I think from a perspective, some, perhaps many of us, would say that what we want to do, what we want to understand are the permanent or long-lasting features and processes of the economy. And if it is long-lasting, what makes it long-lasting? And the answer that I think many of us would say, it's production and reproduction that makes for the long-lastingness, I should say, of the fundamental processes of the economy. it has to be reproduced. Things are used up and they have to be reproduced, and that means there has to be production and exchange. As things are used up, they have to be replaced, and that replacement is carried out by market processes. And that kind of realistic foundation gives one a framework in which we can pose most of the interesting, practical, and realistic problems of our time. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up where Ed left off, and I want to start by saying that if you look at what heterodox economics is broadly conceived, it's largely seems to be defined, at least in terms of departures from some aspect of orthodox economics. So there are core assumptions in orthodox economics, and there are departures. Core assumption, selfish behavior. Departure, social behavior. Core assumption, optimal outcomes, non-optimal outcomes. Perfect knowledge, imperfect and asymmetric knowledge. Rational choice, bounded rationality. Perfect competition, imperfect competition. Rational expectations, adaptive explanations, non-ergodic futures. Passive interactions, strategic interactions, game theory. Automatic full employment, possible unemployment. All outcomes internal to the market. Some outcomes may involve externalities. The function of the state, the ideal function state in the core assumptions to protect property rights in free markets. So in terms of the departure, the state can be viewed as also needing to regulate market outcomes, giving the list of all the other departures. What is interesting is that many of these departures are also part of orthodox economics because they're viewed as extensions of the basic theory. So the core assumptions found define the basic theory, and then the departures allow you in every textbook to have a chapter or two on those. So Becker's theory of the household allows for some social behavior. Herbert Simon's focus on bounded rationality relaxes the sort of assumptions of rational choice and perfect knowledge. Stiglitz focuses on asymmetric knowledge, especially in the financial institutions. Krugman focuses on the implications of economies of scale and heterogeneity of preferences in theory of international trade. Behavioral economics in general focuses on departures from the notion of rational economic man. And game theory focuses on small scale and perhaps larger scale strategic interactions. What is most striking about this core departure set is that these departures, viewed as extensions, cannot be added up into a general theory. There is no general theory of departures. The departures have to start from the core theory, and they all consist of modifications that are local to that set of assumptions. So you take a proper textbook in orthodox economics today, and for every description of one of the core things, there'll be a departure. But when you get to the end of the textbook, you still have the core theory, because the departures are seen sotto voce as just a little bit of extension. So the effect of this is that the core theory remains central to the discourse. It remains, in a sense, the point of departure. And because of that, it retains its hegemony. And for that reason, I would argue that heterodox economics should not operate in this manner, because it in effect keeps the Pope in place, but it has some doubts about some priests. And I think that's not a good way to have an alternative. Perhaps I'm speaking here as a Muslim, but that's another story. So what then should define heterodox economics? I think it is that it should be grounded in a different theoretical foundation. Now, of course, you'll come back to the same issues, and you may come back with the understanding that markets are not optimal, they're not efficient, and all that, but they shouldn't be done by means of starting from the general theory of orthodox economics and then kind of moving away a little bit at a time. And here, there are really only two basic options in terms of general theories, though there are many other specific subsets. First one, of course, is Keynesian and Kaleckian theory. What is important about it is that it's constructed differently from neoclassical theory. It is not to be derived by putting imperfections in neoclassical theory. It's really a different theory. And Keynes particularly saw himself clearly as creating a different foundation for economics, not merely a modification of standard theory. He saw himself as overthrowing the standard theory and creating something else. And that's why he called it the general theory. The key point in Keynes's argument is that aggregate demand is the ultimate limit to production and employment. Unemployment can be a normal state of affairs in a capitalist economy. Keynesian theory, and Keynes himself particularly, were strongly pro-capitalist, and that's an important feature of Keynesian theory because it makes it much more acceptable to the orthodoxy as it's looking for places that it's going to go. The market will be, and the state together will achieve the promise that the orthodoxy offers in terms of the state, which is full employment growth and price stability. And that was a motivating force for the early Keynesians, and I still think it is today. From this comes the fundamental role of the state as regulator of the market, the state as a potentially neutral referee, and obviously these differences have general implications for policy. And I would say that Keynesian theory is the dominant point of view of the heterodox tradition. But there's another set of theories, which are in a sense older than Keynesian theories, and I want to call them here classical political economy, the theories of Smith, Ricardo, and especially of Marx, which are also different, but they're different from Keynesian theory. Capital, labor are not viewed as equal. Class is a fundamental social relation. Race, gender, and ethnicity are bound in the matrix of class relations, and that's a very important point. They're not separate. They're bound in that matrix. The emphasis in this framework is on the turbulent patterns of market forces. Markets don't achieve equilibrium. They achieve a rough balance by overshooting and undershooting, and the disorder is the means to the order. They're not separable. The emphasis on this in this tradition is on competition as the root of the powerful gravitational forces of political economy. The dominant incentive in this is the profit motive. It dominates all others because it's central to the operation of capital and hence of the business sector. The system is viewed as inherently expansionary, which is located in the premise of capital, which is to put money in to get more money out. And of course, if you get more money out, you need to put more in to get more out. And that expansionary character shows up in its geographical expansion, as well as an expansion to new arenas all the time. So it's not just globalization, but all other areas of life that capital expands to. Mechanization and industrialization are intrinsic features of this point of view. And unemployment, if you follow especially the argument in Marx, is a necessary outcome. It's not an option, it's not a possibility, it's necessary. The system has mechanisms to create it. And this is, of course, created on a global scale, not national scale, because the markets operate on a global scale. So you cannot speak about national employment as if it's unrelated to unemployment in Egypt or unemployment in Italy or Spain or whatever, Latin America. Now, the last point is that the state, from this point of view, it can be a potential regulator, but is subject to strict limits. And these limits are of two sorts. One is a political limit, a limit which, say, the Marxist tradition, which borrows the Keynesian argument, often emphasizes, Sweezy and Magdoff, and going back to Lenin as opposed to Hilferding. And the other is a profit limit, because the state cannot go very far in impinging upon the profit motive. So that brings me, I'm clearly in this tradition. I've been watching too many commercials, political commercials, so I feel strongly inclined to say that I'm Anwar Shaikh and I approve of this message. So is space opening up for heterodox economics? I think the immediate reaction to the crisis and to the clear bias that the state has exhibited everywhere, absolutely everywhere, except for some Latin American countries, has been a local and political revolt. And it's growing, and it'll continue to grow because I think things are not going to get better in any near future. But there's also a reaction within the dominant capitalist institutions themselves that market fundamentalism, which these institutions have been enforcing on the rest of the world and on the center countries too, is flawed. Dominique Strauss-Kahn at the first INET conference, which was in Cambridge, said, "We have been misled by the standard models." Now, this is really the heart of the orthodoxy speaking. And so there is space for departures from orthodoxy. And even in political circles and official circles, a comeback of Keynesian economics, because in practice the state has had to return to Keynesian economics and has seen in practice what happens when you do austerity and you get things worse. But in the universities across the world, most economic departments are still under the control of the ayatollahs of economics. And that's just a fact that at the same time, the wall that these people and these schools of thought have erected is cracking. It's cracking less in the United States than it is in Europe, and it's more in Latin America than it is in Europe. So where would one look? I would say that one would look in Latin America rather than Europe, but I would look in Europe rather than the United States, because the US is actually a lagging indicator of this opening space. The space is there, and it will open, I hope, though there's no guarantee of that, but I can say that this is a hopeful time for all of us who have been long arguing against the orthodoxy and emphasizing its significant and grave deficiencies. Thank you.
I thought I'd say a couple of things that I've said before, but I'd just like to put them back on the table about the phrase heterodox economics, and then talk a little bit about where I think some concerns about vision, or about where economics in general, or heterodox economics might go, need to be located. The first thing is that I'm not a big fan of the phrase heterodox economics, partly for the reason that Ed mentioned, which is that it doesn't have any content in it. But I'm also a little uncomfortable about it because it verges towards inaccuracy, or maybe even a little intellectual dishonesty, when it becomes a code word for some kind of left-wing critique of economic policy. Strictly speaking, the Austrian economics are just as heterodox and just as excluded from the mainstream and from orthodox thinking as as post-Keynesians or Marxists or structuralists. So in that sense, I'm a little uncomfortable about using that terminology. The other reason I think it's a very poor branding, and this comes out of my own experience in trying to discuss these things with a lot of people. It means something within the economics profession, maybe to some people. Actually, a lot of orthodox economists don't know what heterodox economics is. They view that as a rather strange phrase. Because economics for them is just one thing, which is pretty much what Ed was outlining, and Anwar was outlining. When you talk to people about the things that heterodox economists are interested in, things like stability of markets, stability of employment, distribution of income, unevenness of world development, people tend to be extremely interested in those topics, and they would like to hear more about them. But if you talk to them about heterodox economics, the eyes tend to glaze over pretty fast, and they lose interest. So I think one of the things we might spend some time on is really trying to think creatively about other ways to explain and advertise the kind of thinking that we're trying to promote with some kind of story or phraseology or advertising campaign or whatever you might want to think of it as, that will do a little better in those respects. In terms of the vision question, I've been thinking about that quite a bit for some reason over recent months. And it seems to me that we really have to go back to some bedrock issues about the way the modern world works and the way we got to the point that we're at and what our attitude is towards that. And I would characterize the modern world as basically a mixed economy system. It's a system that is built on what Marx called commodity capitalist production. There's a division of labor that's mediated by markets. The dynamics of that process are pretty well understood, at least in their basic elements, from the classical political economy that Anwar was mentioning. Now, it used to be that the answer of vision for some people was, what our vision is to go to a organization of either national or world political economy that gets rid of the commodity and capitalist form, and as a result, money and monetary mediations of the organization of the division of labor. And that was very much associated with a model of some kind of revolutionary change in the 20th century, which was a vision that motivated a great many people, both in terms of economic theory and in terms of social activism. I think one of the first things that people are going to have to come to terms with is the question of whether that's a seriously believable position anymore. And your answer to the question of if you don't think it's a seriously believable position, your answer to the question of just what you do think is a seriously believable position seems to me to be very fundamental to your vision or program for economic theory or heterodox economics in some broad sense, or critical economics, or some way of looking at things in a different way. I think Anwar and Ed are exactly right. The distressing thing about the orthodoxy or the mainstream is its extreme complacency in assuming that those questions have once and for all been answered, and that there is no point in discussing them anymore. So one issue for heterodox economics is one I guess responsibility of heterodox economics is to continue to raise those questions and continue to pose them in as acute and poignant a fashion as we possibly can. But you can see that there's a big spectrum of possible attitudes towards the mixed economy that people could take up. For example, Anwar characterized Keynes and Keynesian economics, and to some degree post-Keynesian economics, as a particular way of thinking about that. Actually, this verges into a part of orthodoxy, the neoclassical synthesis, but it was the idea that the market can take care of the allocation of resources, but some state agency has to take care of the utilization of resources, the amount of aggregate demand and the overall utilization of resources in the economy. Well, there's a good deal to be said for that point of view. I think it's a somewhat limited point of view, but it does lead to a kind of an ironic stance on the part of economists who take that view seriously, which is that it's their job to tell the bourgeois economists how to run the system better than the bourgeois economists are doing it. Now, that's not too hard to do, given the mess that the bourgeois economists have made of running the system. You could do a lot better in a lot of dimensions. But on the other hand, it's a rather limited point of view. It does not touch many of the other currents that are important in, say, Marxist political economy and in other basically critical points of view about how we ought to live our life, what's a good life to live, or how can we move towards living a better life. And maybe just what's reasonable to assume about that, I don't know. I guess my view is that you're going to have to put up with the mixed economy more or less in the form that it exists right now, at least for some time. I'm a sort of a Fabian or a gradualist in that respect, or an evolutionist rather than a revolutionist. On the other hand, you would certainly like to nudge and push evolution in certain directions. You'd like to push it in a direction that is more empowering of human development, more egalitarian, and more equal. Finally, let me raise another set of issues. This is somewhat critical of heterodox economics, but it's kind of stuck intellectually. It's not completely stuck intellectually. There have been important advances, say, in areas like endogenous cycle theory, technical advances in the use of statistics in understanding heterodox modeling. But to a very great degree, heterodox post-Keynesian and Marxian theory bear the marks of their historical origins, which, in the case of Marxian theory, was 19th century industrialization and industrial capitalism, and in the case of Keynesian theory was the tremendous failure of the financial system and aggregate demand regulation in the 1930s. Well, we know that those questions haven't by any means gone away, but we have some other ones that are also extremely important. We have a world population of 6.5 billion, not 2 billion or so now. We are pushing up against limits of resources, of energy availability, of climate change, which have certainly ought to have some position in an understanding of a new vision for heterodox economics. So I'd just like to make a plea that we don't leave those things out in our fixation on these older controversies. Thank you.
I want to be mindful that we're here because the students of our department gathered us, and I really want to thank you for that, and also attend to the reason, your motivation for doing that. Because you're at the beginning of your careers, we are engaged in our careers, and part of defining ourselves intellectually and professionally is to name, articulate, discuss our identities. So the project embedded in your first question, what is heterodox economics, is a really important personal and professional project. So I'm really looking forward to what the audience feels about that, because it's your own life, and also people watching this video. I want to invite people who are watching it now or watching it in the future to communicate with us in the department about what that vision is. So with those remarks, I want to frame my remarks in terms of a member of a community. Right now, our community is the Department of Economics at the New School for Social Research. And we've defined ourselves mainly historically and because of the people that are here as being critical within the profession, but also outside of it at the same time. So let's talk about that community in terms of what our goals are and what our activities are, because that defines our group. The first goal is very much, and I think it's evinced here by my colleagues who spoke before me and the ones who are I'm just going to presume, speaking after me, our goal is to advance the profession. We view ourselves as professional economists. We have our own definition of who they are, but we can point to the economists. Many of the economists have been named here. So we want to advance that profession, and we view it as a profession that's broad. What's that profession do? Well, we advance the understanding of the problems facing humanity by understanding our material conditions. So our second goal is, as our community here, is that we can be counted on to be critical of our profession, to actually talk about what our profession believes, how the methodologies our profession uses, and the interests that our professions serve. So we are the go-to place, and I'll define our community in a minute, to hold forth when the profession fails. So we have a lot of attention in the last crisis and whenever a crisis happens. And there's always a crisis someplace because there's vast inequalities on our planet, and there are people, billions of people, who are living on less than a couple of dollars a day and who are not living their normal lifespan. So there's always a crisis. We can be counted on as a group of heterodox economists to not only include critiques of how the mainstream profession, the neoclassical economists, don't get it right in terms of our assumptions, that list that Anwar helpfully provided us. But we're not just critical, for instance, of the assumption that humans make rational choices because we're human beings and we have constrained choice. That's the job of the behavioral economists. We go much further than the behavioral economists and say that we make mistakes because we're constrained in very particular ways. We're constrained by power. And so we talk about the outcomes and the decisions people make in the context of unequal power. And then we set the stage to talk about where those sources of power imbalances happen. Third, we are a community because we're self-conscious about the role that economics plays in advancing the interest of elites. We're very conscious that positioning ourselves as the scientists, closely aligned to the natural scientists among the social scientists, is that we have a particular role in the political economy of our life. And political decisions that are made that actually define what kinds of power of certain groups have. I'll harken back to the comments of Professor Shaikh, Anwar Shaikh, who talk about class as being a particular place where power is distributed, but we understand that that doesn't just happen. It gets enforced, it gets distributed by political elites. And I think that my colleague, Professor Reddy, will talk much more about that self-conscious project. Fourth, we are defined as a community by the generative work we do in teaching students and advancing their careers. So that's part of our project as being tenured professors in an institution that has an endowment or a material base that's not dependent upon corporations and not dependent upon governments directly. All academics have a particular role in society. We are the priests in all polls, public opinion polls about who people trust. Academics are at the top of the list. So we as a community are very self-conscious of that particular and special role we have when we talk about what the material base of society is, that we're trusted. And we never want to violate that trust by being ideological, closed-minded, or not subject to changing our minds because of certain kinds of evidence. So that answers the first question about how we think of ourselves as heterodox economics and what we do. The second question refers to our place in the last crisis. Well, I want to tell you that, of course, we had a place because people depend upon us, because we're trusted, people writ large, about what can be done. So a big project of our department rests in the center that I direct, the Short Center for Economic Policy Analysis. That center is embedded in the economics department in that critical frame because we feel responsible to answer the question, what is to be done? So let me give you an example of what we are doing to help answer the question. I direct the Center for Economic Policy Analysis, which pushes out the work of every member of our department. My work is on retirement income security. That sounds really narrow, doesn't it? But it's a work that defines and defends a very important goal of working people and poor people, which is to defend the right to have some leisure during our working lives and after our working lives. It's the defense of child labor laws. It's defense of the weekend. It's defense of some time for reflection and have control of your own time at the end of your working life. So it's a big project. What we do, it looks very prosaic, but we do it to advance another economic frame is we send out Lauren Schmitz, one of our economics students, to testify at the Connecticut State Legislature. We get grants to pay for plane tickets for me to go to Nebraska and Kansas to talk to state legislature about how to attain a retirement income security. We all go to Washington, D.C. to try to put forth an agenda on narrow legislation at the federal level, but it's all part of what heterodox economists do in our community. I want to describe who our community is. We're here today on the 11th floor of this building in the economics department, but our community is much larger than that. We have 10 economists in our Department of Economics and 11 other economists at the new school. So there's another community. That's 21 full-time faculty. But we're also a community of 100 plus students at the master's level and the graduate level. Add another handful at the undergraduate level. That's a community. But we also even have a larger community of institutions in the United States that define themselves as being welcome to a critical and broad vision of economics. At the University of Massachusetts, the University of Utah, the University of Missouri at Kansas City, there's a small group at the University of Notre Dame. That's in the United States. Bring it out to the departments in the United States that have graduates from all those universities. They too are advancing a project where they come to a mothership here in New York. And we also have members of our community in other universities in Europe, now in Latin America, and in parts of Asia. We also have a bigger community of our alumni who aren't just academics. It's a very self-conscious project of ours. We have academics who are in central banks and ministries all over the world, the Department of Labor in the United States, in labor federations all over the world. That's part of what we are, is what we do. This department is viewed as the mothership, or to be the mother and fathership of heterodox economics, mainly because of the work of Robert Heilbronner and being part of the University in Exile. So I'd like to close in quoting from Robert Heilbronner and our chair, Will Milberg, who asked the same questions a couple of decades ago. What defines a new framework for a period of creative consensus in economic thought? The answer is that it's a recognition of the necessity for a widening degree and a deepening penetration of public guidance into the workings of capitalism itself. Thank you.
Let me, first of all, agree with Teresa that it's a wonderful thing that the students of the New School have organized this occasion. It's given me a chance to understand my colleagues' views a little bit better, which I'm not sure I would otherwise have heard on these matters. And I hope also give us all a chance to have a robust and democratic dialogue about these questions. Let me just begin by noting that the very fact that we have a concept of orthodoxy and heterodoxy in economics, whether or not many members of the orthodoxy recognize that there's a heterodoxy or self-described heterodoxy, is in certain ways an embarrassment. One doesn't hear about there being an orthodoxy and a heterodoxy in physics, except perhaps in areas at the frontier, such as string theory, for those of you who might have an interest in those esoteric debates. For the most part, one doesn't hear that there's an orthodoxy or a heterodoxy in a field such as biology. There may be, again, on the frontier, moments in which there's contestation, robust contestation. But a permanent fissure between orthodoxy and heterodoxy, or even a semi-permanent fissure, which marks the central cleavage in the discipline, is not something which exists for those disciplines. And that is one important respect in which the natural sciences and other real sciences on some robust understanding of what a science would mean or would be are very different from economics and the so-called social sciences generally. So what does it mean that we have orthodoxy and heterodoxy, or at least subjectively, in this discipline? In pursuit of that question, I thought that I would look a little bit into the common root term which they both share, namely doxa, doxy or doxa. And with the aid of this wonderful device, which has an inbuilt dictionary,
That looks really great.
if I can turn it on, I have found a number of relevant definitions that I think it's worth our considering. The word doxology refers to a liturgical formula of praise to God. And it comes from the term doxa, which refers to appearance or glory. So, as these definitions suggest, the concept of doxology and doxa invoke something to do with unreflective adherence. And indeed, Pierre Bourdieu's concept of doxa, very roughly, refers to what people accept without knowing why. Okay. So the concept of doxa has at its base the idea of being unthinking or unreflective. And from this point of view, being heterodox is as much of a problem as being orthodox. It just means that one has a different set of premises which one accepts without reasoning or knowing why. Bourdieu had a debate with Terry Eagleton in New Left Review on the concept of ideology as opposed to the concept of doxa, which may be interesting for some of you to go into in that regard. But I think that this does provide a useful point of departure for our further investigation, because it suggests that the real heart of what we ought to be trying to achieve is a critical practice of scrutiny of our underlying premises. Marx, of course, engaged in what he called a critique of political economy. And a very central element of that critique, and Marx is, of course, one important figure to whom I think many heterodox economists rightly look, an important part of that critique was the idea of looking beneath the surface of things. And so it is that in Capital he goes to what he calls the hidden abode of production, in order to find what he calls the real secret of the capitalist system, which cannot be understood in terms of exchange alone, the superficial appearance of things. And it seems to me that this is one signal example of what is meant by critique. That one must be prepared to go beneath the surface of things and go beyond the rules of the game, go beyond doing what has been established as normal science, or the puzzle solving of normal science in any one historical epoch, to ask very basic and fundamental questions. This is one reason that I don't personally find very persuasive the idea of many mainstream economists that economics has opened up because it has behavioral economics as a part of it, or experimental economics, or for that matter, there are a lot of people who do very detailed empirical economic investigations which focus on problems of econometric identification, using whatever is the latest fad in identification strategies. And these explorations are often presented as being post-ideological or post-doxological, if you will, that in the sense that they're not concerned with the big questions, they're concerned with small questions. Their proponents don't put it that way, but I think this is their defense, which don't, in fact, turn on any ideological or doxological premises. And I think that that's damning enough. The fact that the big questions are not asked is extremely evident. Anwar Shaikh referred to the comment by Dominique Strauss-Kahn that the models had failed us, which was actually exactly what, more or less what Alan Greenspan also said, that there was a flaw in his model. He said somewhat shamefacedly before Congress. So we're in a period of extraordinary self-revelation in this respect, but also of I would say, remarkable effort at quickly papering over whatever divisions have existed and coming up with rationalizations. So the failure to ask the big questions, but also to ask the big questions in ways which are searching and which question fundamental premises, which go beneath superficial appearances, is to me a very crucial part of the problem. Now, as soon as one thinks about what is necessary as to go beneath superficial appearances, then of course one realizes that there is no single self-evident way to do this, and there is necessarily pluralism which will emerge as to what are the appropriate kinds of analyses to undertake. What are the relevant economic, sociological, or political factors? Marx was also, like other classical political economists, engaged in political economy. He felt that it was necessary to transcend the arbitrary division between spheres in order to understand the world, which is also, I think, something that most heterodox economists, if by subjective self-identification, believe. I'm not necessarily identifying myself with that term, because for the reasons I again described, I think that one's allegiance should be to reality and not to heterodoxy. I would also respectfully demur from Professor Ghilarducci's description of our joint position. I don't believe that that our goal should be, certainly my goal is not to defend the so-called profession. In fact, I never used that term because of its rather narrow resonances and implications. I think that in defense of reality, one should smash the boundaries between so-called social scientific disciplines. That's a very basic commitment I think the classical political economists had, and I think it's one that we should all have. So I'm personally not in the least interested in the reproduction of the profession as an end in itself. The last point I would make is that there is a very close connection between critique and construction. That Marx, again, was not interested in critique for the sake of critique, but he was interested in critique as a way of clearing the way, a means of clearing the way for something else. That's why his work was a prelude. Capital was described by him as a prelude. What is it that was to come next, and how should we envision what it is that comes next in any activity of critique? Well, in my view, one of the ways in which heterodoxy, self-described heterodoxy, can overcome some of the stasis and limitation which Professor Foley rightly pointed to, is by engaging in a larger measure of speculative imagination, and doing so without embarrassment. I think that one of the things that becomes very evident once one begins to engage in some speculative imagination and to think about the alternate institutional possibilities, the alternate forms of economic, social, and political organization, is that many of our so-called general theories are actually special theories in the sense that they refer to or take as premises very particular institutional assumptions. And that as soon as one weakens those institutional assumptions, for example, that the transformation of savings into investments is in private hands, in one particular case which I'm referring to, then a different family of possibilities begins to open up. And we should, I think, make it more of our intellectual practice to engage, therefore, in such imagination, which should be fueled by comparative studies in society and history, but also go beyond what is to imagine what can be. Thank you.
Okay, so again, as my fellow colleagues, thank you very much. I appreciate a lot this initiative by our student body to organize this debate. I think this is something that we should have been doing on a regular basis, definitely, because indeed it is very difficult to define what heterodox is, or what heterodoxy is. There are so many different schools of thoughts which actually do not have a common basis. So indeed, at least as Professor Reddy pointed out, it is really important to know what are the theoretical and philosophical foundations of at least of our fellow colleagues here. So yesterday, Lisa told us that we would have this ordering of presentation. So I already thought that my fellow colleagues would have already very good definitions about what heterodox economics would be, right? So, and therefore I didn't think that I would have too much to add on that respect. So I thought that actually it would be fun, actually, for me to take a more provocative role, okay, and somehow be some kind of a devil's advocate, and people who know me, they know that I love to take this role. So the main question, or the first question that we had to answer or to address in this panel was, what defines us as heterodox economists? But I think actually that a better question that we should think about is actually what is important, or why is it important to make the differentiation between heterodox or orthodox economics, right? In other words, what is so particular about being heterodox economics? It's only because we're rebels and because we're kind of off mainstream? Or is it really, does it have to do with the assumptions that we make in our models, in contrast to what orthodox models or the orthodox framework do? And we know about this, the representative agent, the rational expectations assumption, the assumption of complete financial market. Does it have to do with the methods that we use, that we maybe go more into this philosophical grounds or dimensions instead of only this this puristic quasi-physics related framework? Or is it the topics that we're interested in? Okay, so of course they are all important and they all define what heterodox economics is. But however, and that is something that helps me to think about myself, is the fact that I try to remind myself every time that I'm making a model that I am actually just a storyteller. That's it. Okay, so we don't have the luxury of validification, which, for example, chemistry people, chemists, or physicists have. So we will never know what actually the data generating process is, or what the actual true model of the economy is. So actually, the models that we create are pretty much castles of air, nothing else. And there is a danger, a big danger in my opinion, that when people start believing that these castles are actually real. Okay, so we really have to have sane or distance to what we actually do and believe in. Okay, so but the question, of course, is why do we do this? Why do we engage into this modeling approach or this profession? Okay, so of course it has to do with our interest in how the economy works, right? That is obvious, but at least that is what motivated me to engage into this this path of life, is that, and I think that is a common thing for all of us, is that we have a vision of how we would like the world to be, okay? And that I think we agree that we want to have social justice, that we want to have less income inequality, and so on and so forth. So in other words, and maybe this is not so academic, but I think this is actually what is a driving force for many of us, is that we have a political agenda, okay? And that our theories are just the tools that we have to win the game. That's it. Okay? So now the question is, how good are the heterodox tools? And in that respect, how do we find what good is? Right? I will come to this in a moment, but this question, these two questions that I just outlined, lead me to the second question for this panel, which is, had the crisis created more space for heterodox economics in academia or not? So I would like to make a differentiation between heterodox ideas and heterodox modeling. Okay, so I think with respect to heterodox ideas, in respect to the need for a stronger control on the financial markets, for the need of some kind of more equal economic system and so on, I think yes. I think that right now there is a change of mind in also within the mainstream group of our fellow economists. They do care, or at least they think it's worth taking a look at. What are the consequences, or what are the what could be the improvements of a more equal society? So that, in that respect, the crisis has had, even if this is kind of dark, but has had a positive effect. With respect to heterodox modeling, I'm not sure. And why is that? It's because even though the crisis made obvious that made obvious the many failures of orthodox theory, I'm not sure to what extent the models that we have and that we consider heterodox models do a better job in explaining the crisis. Okay, but I know that this is a very slippery territory, so I would actually prefer to talk about what is my own research agenda and maybe you can make some connections to the state of heterodox macro. So while I was in Bielefeld in Germany, I worked, of course, very closely with Peter Flaschel and what I prefer to call the Bielefeld gang instead of the new definition that Bielefeld has. And of course, I was trained and wrote on models based on disequilibrium adjustments. And there are, of course, reasons for assuming that the economy is in disequilibrium, and so I don't want to get so much into detail about that. But what I would like to point out is that during my PhD thesis in Bielefeld, I was basically I mostly read DSGE literature. Okay, so I was very concerned of what actually the orthodox macroeconomic modeling was doing, and I tried to compare the performance of the disequilibrium models that we were building in Bielefeld to what actually was the mainstream, namely these DSGE models. I visited DSGE summer schools, and it was very obvious for everybody that I was the weird guy, the disequilibrium guy among them, but somehow they respected me because they knew that I knew their language. So I could criticize them on their grounds, okay? So my point of talking about my time as a PhD student is that I think that we need to find or to build up bridges with respect to the orthodoxy, and we need to talk their language and then try to put forward our ideas there in that framework, because they have the power. So if we want to have power, and that's what it's the political agenda about, then we have to gain power in their own field. But concerning my intellectual evolution, I realized that most models in the Bielefeld tradition did not focus enough on the role of expectations. Okay, they were very mechanical, and that is also something that has to do a lot with post-Keynesian modeling. So what I intended to do is to incorporate the role of heterogeneous expectations within that framework, and then to analyze the stability of the system and the role of monetary policy, assuming that agents have, of course, they have expectations which are different from rationality, but that they have this kind of behavioral rules for forecasting and so on. So I was actually very pleased when I heard Rajiv Sethi talking in Duncan's conference, and talking precisely about that people in mainstream economics, they have realized that actually this is a very important field to do research on. And actually that is something that is kind of puzzling to me, that post-Keynesian economics, which has the foundations on Keynes, do not have a proper modeling of expectations, because expectations were key for Keynes. I think even more than the aggregate demand constraint. So to finish my remarks, I think that while we understand ourselves as very critical on the orthodoxy, we should be also more critical about our own work. Okay? And through that, we will be able to better our modeling. Thank you.
We'd like to give the panel a couple of minutes maybe to respond to one another, and then open the floor to questions. So if Professor Nell, you'd like to start, if there's anything you'd like to add, and go down the line.
Well, yes. I think an important part of what we call heterodox economics is concerned with economic policy. It's concerned with the theoretical foundations of economic policy, and it's concerned with the practical issues of economic policy. And here we have many overlaps with new Keynesians, and we have many overlaps indeed across the board with many groups. But I think we need to draw a line between those who, for one reason or another, are proponents of austerity. They are almost all orthodox and super-orthodox, but there we also find the Austrians. And then we have those who advocate varying degrees of expansion and intervention on various grounds. Now, there is a very fertile area for debate on the one hand and for cooperation and joint projects, indeed, on the other. You may support a policy, but there may be two different kinds of rationale for supporting it, and there's no reason why those who are interested in that policy shouldn't develop the support for it by drawing on the different traditions. And I think that is a possibility that we should follow through. In other words, the crisis has given rise to a set of problems for which there is no set of agreed solutions, and indeed the general approach to solution that is most popular in the political classes of the advanced world is one which is very evidently making it much worse. And that is the austerity approach. Now this is, it seems to me, a remarkable opportunity for us to say, we have a way of looking at it, you have a way of looking at it that is complementary with us, although there's difference, let's talk. And you debate this, we say to the other side, but why don't you debate us? Because things are not going as well. You said you're going to pull the United Kingdom into prosperity, and you've now sunk into a double-dip depression that even the economist recognizes. So let us consider what kinds of opportunities this has. It seems to me that our department is in fact very well placed to try to raise some money for conferences on this kind of question, for joint research projects and so on. So I think there is a real opportunity here. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we all agree on certain basic propositions. One is that however we define ourselves, we insist upon stepping outside the limits of conventional economics, the ruling economics of the day, which is not necessarily the economics that used to rule with Keynesian economics, nor perhaps economics that will come to rule. And I think we all agree that reality should be the central object of investigation. That is to say, instead of just spending all our time thinking about what Keynes might have said or thought, or Marx, or should have said, or for that matter, what Samuelson or Solow should have said, I think we understand that we have to talk about reality as a central object of investigation. But then two questions arise. How do you approach the object of investigation, which is reality? If you were a physicist or biologist, can you imagine that you would go there without having read Newton or Darwin or Einstein or Dirac? It is unimaginable, and it should be unimaginable, because it would be a terrible mistake. You would be reinventing something, which you're unlikely to invent, by the way, that well. And that then brings up the related issue. Why not just say that, look, unlike Einstein and Dirac and Newton and Darwin, we have a social goal. Let's go for that goal, and we use the tools that we can that be persuasive. Persuasive, of course, to the other side, because we don't have the power, the people in power. But then you run into a problem. Robert Solow is just as progressive in that dimension. He doesn't like inequality. He doesn't want stagnation. He wants... So what's the difference between him and us in terms of that? So then the next step is, why not take Robert Solow's model and add class to the Solow growth model, or add expectations to the Solow growth model? Because then you'll be persuasive. He'll certainly be very impressed by this. And you might persuade people in Congress. But I would argue that because then you remain trapped in a model which is fundamentally wrong. And if the goal that you have is to sort of marginally move away from these models by adding accretions to them, this is what I meant by departures, you remain trapped in that church. And I think that the situation in the world is such that we need to step outside. I don't necessarily disagree with Sanjay's idea of the speculative leap, but I don't mean by the speculative leap that we have to reinvent the alternative, because it's been around for a long time and it's been suppressed. And we need to give room for different points of view to compete about explaining the world, of going beneath the surface and showing structures that are there and saying, look, understanding these structures, certain outcomes are possible and other outcomes are not. And we have to be bold enough, in my opinion, to say that, not flinch from it. Thanks.
Well, just a couple of reflections that were prompted by hearing my colleagues speak. One is something that I've said a lot, and most of the people in this room know that I'm interested in, which is my belief that heterodoxy needs to be methodologically aggressive. So it's very important to be experimenting with new methodologies, new ways of modeling, new statistical techniques in a very aggressive way. For one thing, that's one of the few ways that the heterodox movement can leap over, as it were, the orthodoxy and try to get an extra march on it. And I have another one, if I can. Well, one other thing which is connected to the first one is just the idea that it's more fun to be a heterodox economist. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. I mean, you don't have quite as much looking over the shoulder and quite as many constraints since you've conceded professional success already by the time you become a heterodox economist. The last thing was actually about Christian's point about expectations, and I'd just like to bring up a distinction that I think is very important, which is that there are two ideas of expectations which have kind of gotten mixed up in this debate. One is the concrete expectations people have about the concrete development of the future, what's going to happen to the real GDP or to interest rates or to unemployment as outcomes. But there's another element of expectations which is very important in Keynes that we tend to lose sight of, and this is the question of what do people expect other people's behavior is going to be, or what do they expect other people's behavioral rules are going to be. This is more the type of expectation that Keynes is talking about when he raises this beauty contest metaphor. And it does not, that leads to quite a different understanding of miscoordination and irrationality, social irrationality coexisting with individual rationality that I think is worth exploring.
Let me say that if anybody wants to do a dissertation that adds class or income distribution issues to Solo's model, that would be a very legitimate dissertation to do. I would encourage it. And you should also have Anwar Shaikh on your committee to talk about what the limits might be, and also Sanjay Reddy to talk about how the moral philosophers might want you to broaden your view. But the point of that dissertation would be to fix something and to engage one of a Nobel Prize winner in economics. And that is what we do here. All of us here are advancing the profession because we are referring to a literature and a language and a question and observations about how to fix society using those frames. And also the role of social scientists all over the world, professions, a body of work that were developed about 150 years ago, all of our associations are about that old, was to actually replace dogma and religious figures and powerful figures as the elites who fix society with a more rational, inclusive basis to fix society. So whether we like it or not, we've all signed up to a professional life that is aimed at fixing society using data and observation and peer review. So we can't just say, I just want to respectfully depart, and Sanjay and I have really good conversations about this, that every thinker and scholar is a legitimate engager in what we're doing. We need to move forward what Solo, Keynes, Marx has done in order to actually have anything that's practically a reasonable discussion. So I just want to say last that to do such a dissertation that Anwar Shaikh described is not being trapped. There's a lot of pejorative connotations to it. Being trapped means that it's not legitimate. I agree with Professor Nell here, is that part of what we do is actually to advance policy work and engage those folks who are identified as professional economists in doing that.
Pull the mic.
Yeah, pull the light mics so that.
Thank you. Let me just briefly, perhaps, respond on 2 points. One, I think that Ed has raised a wonderful example regarding austerity. Just last week, in fact, perhaps just 2 or 3 days ago, Larry Summers had a piece, an op-ed in the FT, which provided an excellent critique of the austerity measures in Europe. And indeed, Martin Wolf has been writing regularly with very harsh critiques of the fad for austerity in Europe and so on. Many people who one wouldn't necessarily think of as heterodox, shall we say, and with whom many of us might not agree on many other issues, have launched a biting and many ways analytically rigorous critique of austerity in Europe and around the world. But I think while we should fully acknowledge and indeed embrace what is good in that, which is the understanding that these policies are not the right policies for the world today, and that they come at a tremendous human cost as well as an economic cost, cost to aggregate output and prosperity and growth. Though I would say that's something these figures emphasize less, but it's something we can also acknowledge. I think what's missing there is a deeper understanding of the dynamics which cause a fad or fashion for austerity to emerge right on the heels of a fad and fashion for stimulus. Now, what are the economic and social interests which underlie one or the other? How does one shift into the other? We, I think, have some understanding of that. We tend to talk more about that question than the Larry Summerses of the world do. And I think that that's something which we can very, very helpfully introduce into the discussion, in addition to introducing our own alternative analytical concepts and ideas. For example, we may not always want to speak in terms of equilibrium or in terms of the implicit theory of allocation of resources in the labor market, which someone like Larry Summers might wish to do. This brings me to my second point, which concerns the relevance of various keywords which are absent from the mainstream discourse. Power is the most obvious one. I challenge you to open any mainstream economics textbook and find more than one reference, if you will find one, to the concept of power. Whereas this is obviously a word which is tremendously important in the rest of the social sciences. Class may or may not be recognized here and there, and power by heterodox economists in the world of heterodox economists plays a much greater role. Status, another term which is very important in the classical social sciences of sociology and anthropology, is almost entirely absent except through Veblen and a couple of other figures, Galbraith perhaps, in economics. And I think we should really meditate on this, that there's a reason for these absences, and that overcoming these absences is a useful function that we can provide through alternative forms of theorizing, drawing on alternative traditions, and through the development of new models. There I would also caution that I think a too techno-fetishist approach to model building, which emphasizes that there can be a solution in terms of newer and better models, newer and better in terms of some technical extension or innovation, are not likely to overcome this basic problem. So much as I welcome that, I think there's considerable role for that. I think the silences and the absences in those models, if they are not grafted onto a more robust understanding of the world, which includes these other ideas, will hobble them, will continue to hobble them.
Thank you. Okay, I have a couple of remarks to it. The first one is that when I teach econometrics here, I like to refer to this legend about, I don't recall right now the name of this sonata, but the legend is that the writer, the componist, was dreaming, and then the devil came and he played the violin, and then when he woke up, he tried to write down ta-da, ta-da. I don't recall. In any case, we really do not know what the model is, like the data generating process. So if we do not know what the model is, we do not know if another model is wrong. Okay? So we simply try to guess, and therefore the possibility that RBC models are right, it's not zero, it's positive. Maybe marginal, but it's positive. We cannot completely say it's not correct, okay? So a little bit of humbleness, or whatever it's called, it's, I think, here. Good. The second remark, which refers to Sanjay's last comment, is that, and that sometimes I do have the impression that people get me wrong in this respect. Quoting Abhijit Banerjee, with whom I took a seminar on development economics, I am not a math fetishist at all. I think that actually what a good economist does is that he chooses the level of math that he needs to make one point, his point, not more and not less. So, but we have to admit that for whatever reasons they are, the language of at least macro, it's the language of mathematics and of econometrics or statistics. So even if it is, and again coming back to power and so on, even if it is to bring forward an argument or an idea that you have, why not use it? It doesn't hurt. If you are, like, for example, I had this idea about something like Okun's law and so on, and I was talking with Will Milberg yesterday, and he said, oh yeah, we can see that in the data, in the graphs. Of course, you see that. I mean, econometrics will not tell you anything else, but it will help you to sell it better. And through that, you get better publications, you get better jobs, and then you have more power and more influence. And that is actually what it's about. Thanks.
So we'd like to open the floor for questions. If you would, state your name and your affiliation, and please wait for Mary to hand you the microphone before you begin to speak.
Hi, I'm Eloy. I'm a student here. Professor Nell actually mentioned Samuelson's foundations in his first speech, and I think that captured the imagination of a group of economists in the 1950s and in the late 1940s. But I think the book of Samuelson that actually did put basically had the most influence was his textbook. And my question is about why there has not been an equal pedagogical push from in the textbook arena from the various schools of thought in heterodoxy. And I know it's very hard for people to basically corner heterodoxy into one single realm of thought, but still I think there's been a lot of right now, if there's not a good undergraduate textbook, and I think most of us have taught a few courses know that, actually it's very hard for us to basically just speak from a critique based on a book that is uncritical of what's happening out there. So I just wanted to hear your points about that, and if you see if there is any progress on that. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions and then have the panel answer.
Hi, Fernando, student here also. I just want to touch on an issue that I think was somewhat implicit in most of the remarks, and I would be very glad if it was taken to the surface, which is the epistemological dimension of our position, of our challenge to the mainstream, or whatever we're trying to do here. A lot of remarks kind of suggested epistemological dualism in the sense that social sciences are inherently different from natural sciences. And my question is how each of you personally understand this issue, whether what we try to do in replacing the mainstream or whatever we're trying to do is just to make a better, more realistic or better predictive science in the sense of that science is understood by the mainstream economists, whether a position that is more closely possibly to what Christian said, whether we're just instrumentalists, very skeptical about the possibilities of social science, and we just have a political agenda that we're trying to make successful through some pseudo-theoretical models, whether recuperating Marx's sense of critique might lead us somewhat to a different path in which positive and normative dimensions should be combined to do social sciences in a more meaningful way, which could possibly lead to more directly and naturally to the big questions of in which society we want to live, whether differently from how we can better manage society in relation to the bourgeois economies, or to a kind of more creative institutionalism that Sanjay is pointing to. So that's like the epistemological dimension is what I'm interested in.
Hello, Johan, also in this department. I was going to ask a similar question that Fernando just raised, but since that is on the table, I'd really like to hear more from faculty about their personal views about, well, the role of the intellectual in academia, if you want, the role of the heterodox economists in academia. Teresa and Sanjay touched on this a little bit, and we appreciated that. Christian made a statement about this at the end, which, I don't know, some people might disagree with or agree with. I'd really like to hear about your views on, well, the role of the heterodox or other identified economist in academia. What is it about? What is it for? What are the constraints to this?
So why don't we start with Johan's question? So what is everyone's view on their role as heterodox economists? Start with Professor Nell.
Joan Robinson said that the main reason for studying economics is to be able in your not so much personal as in your intellectual and political life to explode the fallacies of economists. This was probably not the most common view among economists of why you should study economics, but I think it is an important part of understanding economics is to understand the complexity, the difficulty, the very weak foundations on which most empirical foundations on which most judgments rely, which goes to the question of science. Many different models generate the same reduced form, but the reduced form is what you really can get from studying statistics, and then you are left with very difficult identification and specification problems. So our ability to give sound scientific answers is very limited. And that means that a great deal rests on judgment and a great deal rests on other kinds of information than those which are at the bottom of most econometric studies. And I'm thinking of the kind of information that anthropologists have gone to a great deal of trouble to define, the kind of information that you can get from personal studies that try to delve beneath the surface. And this kind of information can tell you what is going on. From that, you might be able to move forward. But I think that a great deal of economics, think of it being an economist at a liberal arts college. You will be asked to participate in all kinds of things. And generally speaking, the economist's position in that is, I'd rather not be there, and so I left.
Okay.
Go on.
Yeah. Sorry. I think really all three questions are closely related. And so let me just start with Johan's. And I think the role of intellectual academia is to try to understand the world, and particularly the object of our particular investigations with economics. We're not doing everything. And that if we're going to be economists, we have to present and try to develop an understanding of the world. And that means developing knowledge by studying not only the world, but other people who have something important to say about it. And that's not different, I think, than any intellectual. But the second one is to change this world. That is to apply this knowledge. And that means not only policy, but analysis. You change the world also by understanding it and passing that understanding to people who might be able to apply it in concrete ways. And I think analysis and policy includes demonstrations in the streets against central banks and all of that, if people have an understanding of why that's wrong. And third part is to pass this knowledge on to education. Mm-hmm. A very important function that we all obviously are committed to. Keep in mind that I don't think there's a difference. We have different experiences in policy. I, for instance, have worked at the Levy Institute as a macro modeler for policy for 5 or 6 years. And I did that precisely because I wanted to learn how this is done. And I want to be able to do it with the best, which was, of course, Win Godley. So I have a great respect for policy and a great interest in it, but I insist that in order to approach that question, you have to have some place to stand, and that place should be distinct. That's my personal view. Other people don't necessarily share that. But that raises the question about a textbook. If you can produce a textbook which is a series of extensions of orthodox economics, and there are such textbooks, there are progressive writers who can say, well, there's a solo growth model, then you add this to it, and it doesn't work that quite way, then you move on to a different issue. I think in order to have a textbook, you should have a unified foundation in the same way that neoclassical does, and that Keynes tried to do. And it's, again, my personal preference, that you have to begin from that foundation, but you have to answer the same questions. You cannot just choose your question in a textbook. You can do it in your personal work. So you have to answer microeconomics and demand curves and exchange rates and interest rates and relative prices and growth and inequality in a unified way. And that can only happen through a collective effort. Keynes was synthesizing ideas that he developed, but of course he had the best people in the world working with him to push these ideas and apply them. And neoclassical economists have thousands, if not tens of thousands of people extending this. If we're going to do the same, we have to have some agreement about some framework, and we have to proceed on that. And as you know, that's a very hard thing to achieve when nobody wants to talk about it and nobody wants to fund it, and you cannot get people who have the time. Our students should be fully funded so they can work on this rather than having to do other things. We're not able to achieve that. So but I think it will happen. Absolutely will happen. It's just taking more time, because there are so few of us and our resources are so limited.
Yeah, I think Eloy raised a really interesting issue, although it might be worth a bit of study. In fact, there have been a lot of attempts to write textbooks from a heterodox point of view, and there still exist a number of textbooks that are on the market and do sell that take up a heterodox point of view in a very explicit way. It might be a useful thing to look both into the history of that. For example, there's one very interesting episode was when Joan Robinson and John Eatwell tried to write a substitute for Samuelson's textbook, and that more or less has been submerged, but I think it's well worth going back to look at that again in retrospect and try to understand just what went completely haywire on that question. So anyway, I think that's a really good point. On Johan and Fernando's question about epistemology, broadly speaking, and these are, of course, very complicated things, and it's hard in a very short intervention to make much sense of it. But I always, when that question comes up, I tend to go back to things that Hegel actually had to say, which I think Marx learned either directly from reading Hegel or in the general German idealistic philosophical milieu that he grew up in and was educated in. Hegel's point is that there is a real difference between studying human beings studying themselves, either in the form of individual human beings or in the form of society, and human beings studying phenomena like cosmology or particle physics or chemistry. And and it's well worth trying to think exactly what is that difference. It certainly is not a difference about being sloppier or more casual about the use of evidence to draw conclusions. You want to be very careful about that, and there are clearly very important things to be learned from the natural sciences about how to understand information, how to understand evidence, and how to evaluate it. What Hegel was trying to say was that there is inevitably another dimension when human beings study themselves, which is a self-referential or reflexive dimension, which is easy to misunderstand. It's not the same as the distinction between positive and normative economics, although that's a sort of a stab in the direction of trying to acknowledge this difficulty. The way I take Hegel's idea is to say you cannot have knowledge. Science means scio, is the Latin word for I know. So you can't have knowledge about society and about human beings except from a certain point of view. That doesn't mean it isn't knowledge, but it does mean that the point of view is built in a way that's much more difficult to purify in the case of social science or human sciences than it is in the case of physical sciences. So my view would be, learn everything you can from the natural sciences and then confront where we have to go beyond that.
The economics in the United States would be very different if it wasn't for Robert Harbonner's book. And at one point, for a couple of years, it was marketed with Samuelson for $1, for $1. You could get the worldly philosophers in Samuelson's book with the expectations that the professor would motivate studying Samuelson by reading the worldly philosophers. And that petered out because we didn't figure out a way to help the professor integrate it. I think we're having a discussion here. I think all of the three questions point this out, that we're actually, this is not a problem of demand, and I think all of us agree. There is a huge demand, especially in 2008, for a new school and community, extra community response to the teaching of economics, to the practice of economics, to the understanding of material base. And we did not have a response. We really failed. Vili put together an article that got published in a European journal. People flocked to Anwar's class that first semester. I had extra seminars of my ULEC course. I came in early, and there was 100 people once. We did that panel, Ed, Anwar, and I, to figure out, but there was nothing on the web. We did not push it out with a new school curriculum on what a principal's class is. We're struggling. We have an undergraduate major that Duncan and others pushed forward when I first came here. But people expect us to have something to say. And we've kind of failed as a community to actually provide an alternative. MIT, Harvard are putting out their syllabi on the web for everybody to use. Kansas State, community colleges will pull down those economics textbook. So to speak to Johan's point, which actually might be where you all can get jobs, it might be the subtext of that question. Peter Doherty, who's the president of Princeton University Press, has published more economists and more Nobel Prize economists than anybody on the planet. He's been the editor for more economists. A lot of way we do communicate is through our books, not our articles. And he wrote a book called What's Cool About Adam Smith. It was a very forward-looking, positive view of the dynamics of the economics. And he says that we're thriving in the suburbs, in sociology and political science, in institutes, in development studies, in public policy programs. You'll all find economists in liberal arts and liberal studies because there's a huge demand. So actually the discussion here isn't like why isn't anybody paying attention to us, it's actually why we're not supplying more resources to generate an expansion of our critical view.
Okay. I would also like to agree with, I think it was Ed who said that all three questions are deeply connected. One way one might approach the problem is, first of all, to distinguish between a broad and a narrow conception of science. There is a broad conception of what a science is, which is embodied in, say, the German idea of a Wissenschaft, which is very, very expansive. It does not, it really refers to the systematic generation of knowledge through a variety of means, with no presumption to ahistoricity or atemporal stability of that knowledge, no presumption necessarily to the identification of universal laws, even though there may be such an aspiration, certainly in the heyday of German science, as Duhem referred to it. So there is that much broader understanding of what science is in continental tradition, but I think in the Anglo-American understanding of the term, very often it is the narrow conception of science, almost entirely, which is these days, which is related to these notions, in particular of the possibility of generating reproducible results, laws, and so on. And that is the conception of science which, of course, the Samuelsons of the world invoked in insisting on the scientificity of economics. And it's that conception which we should examine carefully to understand whether or not it has any bona fide justification. Duncan pointed to one of the reasons for doubt about the sufficiency of that view, and I think, namely, the problem of subjectivity, and there's also related to that the problem of what George Soros calls reflexivity, which many of us have been concerned with. But there are various other problems one can point to, and in my mind, most of them relate in one way or another to the fact of human agency. The fact that we experience ourselves as agents who are capable of world making and remaking, and for that reason, our actions are individually and collectively not easy to reduce to laws. From this point of view, it's extremely amusing that Milton Friedman decided to hang his shirt on the peg of prediction. Mm-hmm. The claim that economics, neoclassical economics in particular, was a highly successful predictive science, when of course it is anything but. I mean, it's extremely challenging to find any sort of demonstration that neoclassical economics has succeeded in prediction. And of course, that need not be an embarrassment. Milton Friedman made it an embarrassment for himself by insisting that that was the criterion by which the discipline should be judged. But it need not be an embarrassment if one takes the broader view, as I do, that this is a discipline which has to have multiple ends. And some of those ends are, for example, other ends are description and explanation, which is not the same thing as prediction, and evaluation. So there are various ends that one can think of for a human science or social science in the now broader understanding of the term, which are not reducible to the identification of laws and the employment of those laws to generate predictions on some narrow measure. Now, if one asks the question, what do most economists do, those who have PhDs and are employed in departments that are called departments of economics, I think, and what do they think that they're doing? I think that what many of them think that they're doing is that they're putting bricks in a wall, and creating an edifice of some kind. And each one is making their own little bricks. Some are shinier or more durable than others, but they're making bricks. And those bricks accumulate to some impressive construction.
A Tower of Babel.
Indeed. So I think we don't necessarily share that view. There is a thing called a castle of sand, and the problem is that very basic questions, which would lead to the undermining of the whole edifice, are most often not asked. So I think one of the things that we should avoid strenuously is again, what Thomas Kuhn called the normal science puzzle-solving mode of, which is this, of constructing little bricks within some well-established system of rules. That, I think, is most likely to lead to, is a mirage, which will lead to disappointment. The textbook, as an idea, corresponds very much, I think, there's an elective affinity, one could say, between that idea and this notion of constructing little bricks and putting them on laying them onto the existing edifice, because it corresponds to an idea of there being some closed system of thought in which there are key precepts which need to be presented as the entry point for some further investigation, for higher studies, in which still more bricks will be laid on to the edifice, which is the student's knowledge of the subject. And I think that this is something which those who believe that this discipline, like other disciplines in the human sciences, is really a field of contestation rather than of accretion of knowledge over time, would not and should not easily accept. And that's one reason that the textbook, I suspect it's one reason that the textbook as a model hasn't taken off, the Heterodox textbook, quite apart from the other issues, garden variety, but also crucial issues relating to production, distribution, markets, and ideology or doxology. I think one of the facts to keep in mind about these so-called social sciences in comparison with the natural sciences that is really crucial is that ideas are associated with interests. And because ideas are associated with interests, there will be permanent contestation as long as there's a permanent diversity of contesting interests. Or perhaps you can remove the word permanent there. There will be contestation as long as there are contesting interests. And in this respect, I would say the situation of the social sciences is not entirely different from the situation of, say, moral philosophy. We don't expect our debates about the good life ever to end. And for different reasons, we don't necessarily expect our debates about certain economic issues to end, at least as long as there are social reasons for there being a diversity of interests. And from this point of view, the model of social science as some distanced inquiry in relation to its object of study is clearly, I think, mistaken. There's much more to say, but let me stop there.
Thanks. Okay, so first of all, I would like to stress the point made by Anwar about the need of a unifying framework for heterodox economics. You can say, or you can think whatever you like about the DHGE framework, but what I think it's beautiful about that framework is that you can really track back the genealogy of that modeling approach. So you see they started with the RBC model, and then they put some imperfections first of wages, then of prices, and then they put the financial accelerator, and so on and so forth. So that is something which somehow has allowed them to make progress within that framework. If that framework is correct or not, it's a different issue, right? But at least they were willing to agree on something, and that is something that and I think it's not only about heterodox economists. I think it's about left-wing people. Also, like in Germany or whatever, left-wing people, they seem not to be able to agree. I don't know why. In any case...
is that different from any other sort of person? Just a question.
No, I do think that the conservatives, they are able to agree on one particular candidate, but the left-wing, they simply spread. I don't know. Maybe it's this kind of rebellious thinking of us. In any case, however, I do think that in contrast to, for example, physics, where you have a theory and you stick to that theory until a better theory shows that the previous theory was wrong, and then you move on. In economics, you cannot do that. You need to revise previous concepts and think about old ideas and to what extent they can be applicable to the actual problems. But on the other hand, I would not. I'm against a little bit about this notion that we can have one model which is has this kind of one-size-fits-all nature. We don't have to have that, and because I don't know, maybe the Kalexian model is not right to do to analyze climate change, right? So I have nothing against being eclectic in the modeling approach. So maybe, and in that respect, maybe this should be a way to put forward the heterodox modeling by borrowing some techniques or some ideas of the orthodox literature. I don't know. Maybe that is an idea to pursue. And respecting the last point by Sanjay about prediction. I mean, it's reminded me a little bit of this critique about DHG modeling with respect to the crisis, in the sense that that a lot of people said that these models were completely misleading because they didn't warn us against the crisis. Well, the problem is that those models are kind of fair weather models. They were never meant to predict crisis. So it's a little bit unfair to criticize those models because that was not their goal from the beginning. So I don't know why I wanted to point that out, but thanks.
Let's have people have the last word.
So just to clarify, if I make the prediction that it's going to be sunny every day in New York, can I defend my model against the charge that it has rained by the explanation that it was a fair weather model?
No, well, basically, if you put in your assumption that only one state is there, namely that it's sunny, then and then to criticize the model because it's not predicting rain is simply showing that you are not. I mean, you have to somehow analyze a model within the framework that is set up into. And for those models, they had rational expectations. So irrational behavior was simply not allowed in them. To expect that they would reflect an irrational behavior is simply unfair to the model.
I think that's a description, not a defense. But
well, no, I mean, no.
Well,
Basically, I do think just to finalize this, I do think that we need different models, and some models they should be crisis predictors. And if you do some kind of pooling of the different predictions of the different models, then maybe you could be more accurate. Yeah.
We're going to open the floor for just a few more questions because we're going to have to wrap up.
Lucy Webster. I'm a MA graduate here from about 5 years ago. I'd like to ask a question that relates to public policy. I'm concerned with the evidence that a lot of people on the right in the Republican Party are encumbered with ideas that do not match at all my ideas of reality in terms of, I mean, the slogan that you can't take tax money from the very rich because they're the job creators is, in my view, countered quite nicely by a slogan from the Democrats that the job creators are the people who buy things and create demand. So this very simple idea that you need demand, aggregate demand to get an economy going is not perceived hardly at all on the far right. And these people are therefore playing into the hands of people. They're working against their own interests. And I would like the panel to comment on what economists should be doing to try to rectify this lack of basic education.
Pedro, I'm a student here, and well, I think the answer to my question was partially answered by some of you in your intervention, but I want to put it in a more specific form, and that is that in academia, at least, we face certain constraints. And that is, for instance, we have an incentive to publish a lot. And that incentive seems to create a pervasive effect in the sense that the idea of critical thinking seems to be pushed aside because you want to publish a lot, and probably you just change a model a little bit here, or you, instead of applying it to the United States, you apply it to China, and then you have an additional article with you. So, given your experience, I'm wondering, besides courage, what other alternatives do we have? And if you think that this is changing in the future, at least in the long term.
Hi, my name is Luis. Is working? Yeah, I have one question. I think I want to understand more about the differences between the methodology between mainstream economics and heterodox economics. Professor Shaikh mentioned in his intervention that usually we see heterodox economics as departures from mainstream economics assumptions, but I think there might be some other deep differences between these two approaches. I just would like to learn more about this.
Yeah. And Christian?
Hi, my name is Christian. I'm a PhD student here. I have a more specific question on a topic which I think is one of the major shortcomings of heterodox macro models, which is the response to the Lucas critique. I think the Lucas critique, which is the critique that the policy implications or the policy implementation derived from a structural model affects the very parameters of the structural model, is, in my view, a valid critique. I just think that the response of the mainstream, just assuming rational expectations and building microforms and macro models, is not a useful response to this critique. But I also see that mainstream heterodox macro models don't really have to say a lot about the Lucas critique, and don't have, in my view, so far, a satisfying response to this critique. I think the major response is just ignoring this critique and building still the same structuralist macro models. So I would be interested in your views on the significance of the Lucas critique and how you would think that macro models should implement that or take that into account.
We're going to run over time a little bit, but I think these questions are important, so we'll just pose them to the panel and then we'll wrap up.
Start?
Yeah, you can go ahead and keep our answers short.
One important feature of many orthodox, unorthodox approaches is to take history much more seriously. And I think that is something which bears on several of these questions. Once upon a time, the economy really did consist, to a very considerable extent, of a large number of small, single proprietor firms. Now that has some serious consequences. For one thing, it means that financial markets are very incomplete, because a large part of the capital structure of the economy does not get bought and sold on financial markets. There is no equity market for these single proprietorships. So much of what we study in modern finance simply didn't exist before World War I, and in fact the stock market boom of the 20s was a lot of firms that had gotten larger during World War I and also had gone through the serious crisis immediately after World War I were reorganized and equity was raised. So the first crash came about because of a change in the capital structure, meaning financial capital structure of the economy. Also, before World War I, government was very small. It was typically single-digit fraction of GNP. So a lot of the problems that we have are really different. And I think it's probably realistic, although it's impossible to test. At least I tried with a group and you couldn't really work it out. But something like crowding out, something like a big government boom would be inflationary, probably was true, or at least it wasn't a wildly implausible idea in an economy that was mainly made up of a large number of small single proprietary firms who employed workers whom they could not dismiss. And the reason they couldn't dismiss them is that built into the skills of the workers, as opposed later in mass production to built into the machinery, were the skills that made the firm what it was. So you couldn't dismiss them. You couldn't lay them off. If you might go bankrupt and have to shut your doors, and then you would have unemployment. But you didn't have the easy layoff system which developed after World War II. So a lot of, for instance, the beliefs of which we see paraded in grotesque and clownish fashion in the public debates now are echoes of aspects of the economy which were more or less accurate long ago and can be seen sometimes in the third world today. So I think that's one aspect. History is interesting just simply in itself, but it's also interesting as to look at the interaction between history and ideology, history and political views. So that's one point. Aggregate demand, of course. Where's aggregate demand in the Solo model? Where's aggregate demand in the Romer model? Romer model is endogenous growth. It has interesting externality properties, etc., etc. But it doesn't have aggregate demand. So if you look at you don't have it in the long run. The position, the Keynesian, the orthodox Keynesian position was articulated very well by Tobin. We have aggregate demand problems in the short run, but in the long run, the economy grows along a full employment path. If you take that perspective, then you have aggregate demand is just a short run problem. Why are you worried about it? Critical thinking and the incentive to publish. Once upon a time, the New School was seen as and advertised itself as a place where you could think problems out. You weren't subject to these kinds of pressures. Sraffa couldn't get tenure today, I'm sure. Our university actually covered itself in intellectual glory, I think, recently. The second most significant graduate of Princeton University published one article of real scientific significance, wrote a thesis which has not been seen since, was there only 2 years. The first most important graduate was President of the United States and one of the authors of the Constitution, James Madison. The third most significant graduate of Princeton was also President of the United States and founder of the League of Nations. And in between, Alan Turing, who could not get a job in academia anywhere in the world today. So there is really significant change in the way we look at and think about critical thinking. You've got to publish. You've got to churn it out. Whether you've thought it through is another story. The question is, have you significantly cited appropriate sources and made some kind of thoughtful contribution in discussing them? Now, I think this is too bad, but that's as for methodology. I suppose at this point one should say, I've just written a book about it.
Yes.
I don't know what to say. The methodological individualism, broadly speaking, a very big basket category, is the intellectual burden of orthodox economics. Some kind of structuralism, some kind of probing beneath the surface to find the real secrets of production, or whatever, however you want to put it, but looking for mechanisms that you can somehow identify and tell you something that you don't see on the surface. I think something like that is what most of us are looking for in thinking about a heterodox approach, and that might help us to deal with the problem of the Lucas critique, because I think the Lucas critique is very shallow. It doesn't even discuss what policy does. Why should government spending, let us suppose that investment spending falls and government spending rises to compensate. Now you're going to say that this has affected the structural parameters because the government policy has changed? I don't think so. Why didn't investment spending affect it? I mean, what is being done? And if you're going to ask what is being done, you have to ask what exists. What are the structures that are going to be changed? If you write a production function, you've just given up the game. For one thing, there are all kinds of reasons why that is. But if you have not really identified the structural parameters of the economy, then you can't say that policy is going to change them because you don't know what they are. And so I would argue that here again, the question is how to develop a theoretical understanding of the way in which the different aspects of the economy fit together, and then show that you are able to specify a model that you can arguably in some way identify. And then you can ask what kinds of changes in activity? Government, but what about a merger of several giant corporations? Will that not affect expectations? Will that not affect the working of markets? Will that not increase the degree of monopoly or something like that? That could also lead to changes in these.
So for the sake
enough.
of time, if we could just keep it to really quick comments because we have to wrap it up.
Just as a historical note, Heinz Kurtz at a conference in Graz mentioned that Sraffa was offered a job at the new school. I just saw that they found it in Sraffa's archives, and he turned it down. Now, in the old new school, he probably would have gotten tenure. But the new school, he would definitely have not gotten tenure because he wouldn't have fit the conventional mode of proceeding as an academic, churning out papers and doing the right kinds of things. And as you know, I teach a seminar in Sraffa for the last 15 years, so I hold him in the highest regard, and even though he could not have gotten tenure at the new school. On Lucy's question, why right-wing politicians mistakenly supporting wrong policies? I think the point, Lucy, is that they're not mistaken. I think they're right. They're right because the policies are right for some people. The policies that are wrong for most of us are right for some people, and that's a point that Sanjay made about interests. Their interests, the interests they speak to, the Koch brothers are absolutely happy with those policies. They know what's going to happen.
Ordinary people vote for it.
That's a different issue. That's a different issue. But
Political science has to
that's right. That's outside of economics, I think.
Professional division.
That's right. And well, in fact, that brings us to the next point, which is this notion of the Lucas critique and the idea of rational expectations. Now, to me, it should be clear that there is an answer to the idea that people's expectations affect outcomes, and outcomes affect expectations in turn, and that's very old. As Christian pointed out, is built into Keynesian theory from the start. It's not going to be modeled as rational expectations, but it's built into all economic theory. Marx begins by saying the difference between a spider and a human is that a human architect conceives of the object before he builds it, and a spider does not. But it's the expectation that distinguishes, not the beauty of the cathedral. And that's a very important thing to understand. So they're absolutely there, but it doesn't follow that they can be modeled in this absurd way. Someone who cares about this is George Soros, who has a whole approach to the notion of reflexivity. And the idea is that expectations affect actual outcomes, and actual outcomes affect fundamentals, and then they feed back, and expectations, because they affect actual outcomes, can create bubbles, but the distance between where you are and the fundamental begins to have a telling effect on expectations, and you come back. I've always argued, I've seen in courses, as you know, that's the Roadrunner example. Coyote runs off the edge of the table and keeps running in the air, and he's perfectly fine until Roadrunner whistles and says, "Look down." And at that moment, he falls to the ground like a stone. So we are living in this moment where the Roadrunner looked down. And it has nothing to do with rational expectations. It's about how people behave and how feedback comes, and we can certainly model that. By the way, there is no such thing as a single individual. In Roadrunner, there's one Roadrunner, but we're all Roadrunners. And we have different beliefs about whether we are off the cliff or not. We have different understandings of what to go, and how far we can go. For every market where there are longs, people who believe the market's going to go up, there are shorts, people who's going to go down. And the shorts and longs disagree with each other. So we're really going to talk about this. We have to understand how heterogeneous people with different expectations about an indeterminate future interact. And of all the answers to that, the worst possible answer is irrational expectations, in my opinion. So I would say that any model built on rational expectations is wrong from the start, whether or not it mimics some empirical process. It's methodologically wrong. And so the last point is that it's not a question of tools. It's all of us here use tools. We use econometrics, we use nonlinear dynamics, we use econophysics, we use agent-based simulation because we think those are useful. As you know, those of you who work with us, we encourage you to work in that direction. Speaking for myself, what is important to me is the context in which the tool is used. I am not impressed by tools in themselves. They have the ability to answer some questions, but they do not generate the questions, and they do not give you in themselves an interpretation of their result. That has to come from the outside. That's why you need a better vision, a better understanding of economics. That's why we teach what Halbrunner long ago taught us, which is there's more than one point of view, and in my opinion, they were generally better in the old days than they are now.
Okay, just to try to, these are four very, very big questions. Lucy, I think that the conservative Republicans think that the U.S. economy is going to be 25% smaller than you do. Now, they may be right, that may be a rational expectation on their part or a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I think it's in that context that they are trying to push the kinds of macroeconomic fiscal policy that they are. Pedro, the question about the sociology of academia, that's really a historical question. And in different historical periods, there have been different routes to academic success. And maybe one of the methodologically individualist prophecies or predictions is that students will follow whatever path happens to be defined right at the time that they are trying to make a career. So if they're in late 19th century German scholarship, they are going to write a big book, thoughtful, really long big book. And if they happen to hit the 2000s in a U.S. academia, they're going to write a bunch of articles. I think the most interesting thing about that question is the hammerlock that this is this phenomenon called hegemony that orthodoxy has managed to achieve over that process, over the process of the ranking of journals and of the publication process. And I think we ought to do a lot more critical work on that. Luis, your question about the tools, I think there are issues there, but in my mind, those are issues about the philosophy of science and what you expect. And this actually touches on Christian's question too. That is, what do we think we're trying to do in building economic models? I think the notion, and this also touches on this question of should the DSGE models have predicted crises, and or were they built in such a way that they could not possibly predict a crisis? I think those are things that are well worth reflecting on in their own right from anybody's point of view. I'm not sure that there's going to be a big unanimity of heterodox thought as opposed to orthodox thought on that question, because plenty of heterodox economists seem to think that they want to build a model to predict the concrete path of the economy, and the contradictions that are involved in that project are very substantial. Christian, there's two ways to think about the Lucas critique, and we could go into the more philosophical basis of it, just along the lines that I just mentioned. But I really think it's important to understand the Lucas critique as a moment in the history of American political economy. And actually, people like the NYU guy will say this very, very clearly. The policy that they are concerned about was Keynesian fiscal and monetary policy, the way it was run in the 1950s and 1960s. The model that they are concerned about was Modigliani's attempt to do structural modeling. Ed has written about this in the book that he is just referring to support that. It has to do with the trade-off between inflation and unemployment, the idea that there was a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Now, my view of that is that this is a code word for a certain kind of class problem that was arising in U.S. capitalism and world capitalism at that time, and that the problem of inflation and inflationary expectations is basically a mystified way of talking about upward pressure on wages and the question of what was going to be done to control upward pressure on wages. So I'm just suggesting that maybe shifting gears a little bit allows you to see this in a somewhat different context than just a narrow methodological context. I guess we've lost one of our panelists here.
Yes. So, Lucy, I'm reminded by your question of the statement by what was his name? The former head of the National Union of Mine Workers in Britain, Arthur Scargill, that in explaining why he read the Financial Times, he said, "Those bastards, they can't afford lies." And something similar is attributed to Noam Chomsky as well, I believe, about the New York Times. But that's, of course, for themselves. That doesn't mean that lies aren't useful when believed by others. Not to be too simplistic about it. Obviously, it's more complicated than that. You can see from the pages of the FT that there are, in some sense, superficially plausible disagreements and superficially reasoned disagreements among the writers and readers of an organ such as the Financial Times. So that suggests that a reductionistic, interest-based explanation will only go so far for any group. Pedro, you raise a very interesting question. I'd like to connect this to Christian's question and also perhaps respond a little bit to Teresa's reference, I believe twice, to Nobel Prize-winning economists. I'm sorry she's not here because I think we could have a very interesting discussion on this question. There are people, I believe Phil Morovsky has been writing about this recently, though I have not yet read his work on this, who would argue, I think rightly, that the Nobel Prize has been something of a bane for the discipline of economics, or as some correctly insist on describing it, the Swedish Bank Prize in memory of Alfred Nobel, because it stands at the apex of an entire structure in which the understandings of knowledge are flawed. And this goes back to the metaphor of brick building. If one believes that there's contestation which is present and ought to be present in the discipline with respect to various questions and at various epistemic levels regarding basic premises as well as regarding specific conclusions, then that detracts from the atmosphere of a discipline that would detract from the atmosphere of the discipline which does exist, which is that there are people who are smart, whiz kids of various kinds, who make fundamental contributions and then are meant to reign over the discipline. Larry Summers, I don't think I've ever heard Larry Summers described without hearing the phrase "the smartest guy in the room" follow his name. I've heard various power brokers describe Larry Summers to me in that way. And that's part of an ideology of smarts or of whiz-kiddery, Wunderkinder, in which people are made, have careers made in economics on the basis of being clever, often in an extremely narrow sense of the term, being good at dealing with various kinds of logical puzzles, being quick-witted, not necessarily being deep, not necessarily being searching, not necessarily asking the right questions, not necessarily providing ultimately plausible answers. And to my mind, the Nobel Prize is not something to celebrate, nor are Nobel Prize winners in economics automatically something to celebrate. I think people to celebrate. I think there are Nobel Prize winners who are very deserving, and there are many who are not. So I'm not inclined to provide automatic deference to Nobel Prize winners. I certainly don't see why this department should. So I would ask Teresa to perhaps tell us more about her view on this issue. Now, with respect to Lucas, I think Lucas is a very interesting example in this regard. I'm not a macroeconomist, though I do take a dilettante's interest in macroeconomics. By
the way, Lucas is the only Nobel Prize winner whose citation mentions macroeconomics.
Is that right? Oh, how fascinating. Indeed.
Not
yeah, nor the most recent ones. Indeed. So I think it's a fascinating example. Now, how was he clever? Clearly he was clever. But there's a difference between being clever and being making a really foundational contribution which deserves ultimately a great deal of intellectual credit. One way to approach this is the following. To recognize that the occurrence of stagflation in the developed countries in the 1970s was something independent of Robert Lucas. And one way or another, the world would have had to make efforts to explain the new era. And I think the popularity of the Lucas critique in the light of the breakdown of the Phillips curve relationship was something that has to be understood in large measure as driven by these historical facts. If one looks at the specifics of the era in macroeconomics which Lucas ushered in, and in particular the aspects of La-La Land which are present in the modeling strategies of Lucas and his successors, the representative agent fiction especially, and the tyranny of that fiction, as well as various other modeling strategies which were part and parcel of really of the rational expectations approach, then I think that one could make an argument that this was a pernicious effect. So should one take into account the feedback relationships that exist? Of course. But should one call it the Lucas critique as people do and give it as much weight as one gives it? I'm not so sure, especially in light of this historical context. Let me stop there.
Thanks. Yeah, I completely agree, for a change, with Sanjay now here. Indeed, I do think that the Lucas critique has become an obsession in this type of modeling approach, and yeah, it's an obsession about an assumption, namely rational expectations, we may not be even true, right? So you are actually measuring the performance or the quality of a model on the basis of something that you actually don't even know whether it's relevant or not, right? However, we should, when we do modeling in like econometric modeling, we should always be concerned about the stability of the coefficients that we analyze. And for example, if you take a look at the whole research program by Katarina Juselius in Denmark, together of course with Johansen, they care a lot about this, about the stability of what they estimate. And that is, I think, a valid way to account, even though it's an indirect way, but to account or to show that your model or that your framework is stable over time, and therefore it's less prone to be affected by this called Lucas critique. So even though, of course, and there I agree also with Anwar, that we should have these interactions or these feedback effects of expectations on the dynamics of the economy, this Lucas critique cannot become a fixed point, so to say, of our thinking. Now, concerning Luis' question, well, I mean, I think it's quite clear, and my colleagues have outlined that already, the question about the tools. Now, the last question about the pressure for publication. I mean, I think one strategy that one can pursue is to do both. To pursue both approaches. On the one hand, you do a more applied, more econometric work, and then if you follow, so to say, the rules of the game, then you will get published. That is, so to say, what will give you the job. And on the other hand, you can pursue these more philosophical, more big questions, which actually should define your career or your thinking in the long run, definitely. But at the end, the bottom line is that you have to get a job. to have time to think about the big questions, you have to have tenure. That's it. I wanted one more thing. I think it's gone. Okay, I'll stop here.
I want to thank everyone for coming, and especially the panelists for a thoughtful and rigorous discussion. Hopefully we can have more events like this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.